All right, guys, welcome back to biology. We're going to hop right into this lesson today. It starts in chapter 10, When Worldviews Collide, and specifically focusing on the worldviews of evolution in contrast with the worldview of creation. And the first question we see here is, how does worldview affect how people think about the history of life? This is a very important question, and it's the very center of this chapter. It's very important to answer, especially when contemplating or considering the history and the origin of life. Think about this question as we study this chapter, and I would like to say this: your view of God and the Bible will dictate your beliefs concerning the origin of life. If you do not believe in God, you will not believe in creation. You do not believe in the Bible, you will not believe in creation. And if you do believe that there is no God, it will possibly lead you to believe in evolution. This is just common sense stuff. And so moving on, we will have the evolution of evolution, or the changing nature of evolution here. The first term that you need to recognize is biological evolution. This is the slow, gradual change in organisms from one kind to another. And here you see this picture. Many of you have seen a picture similar to this. It starts with the monkey, and then it changes to a more evolved version and slowly increases to the final product here, which is modern man, and that happened over millions of years. It was a slow, gradual change, and this is the main concept of evolution. The monkey to the man, or even the dinosaurs to the birds. These are all popular beliefs in regard to evolution, and biological evolution specifically. The next term we see here is species. Species are groups of organisms that look the same and have the same structure. And here we see the fixity of species, which means that species do not change over time. This is in complete contrast to evolutionary thought, and this term, fixity of species, is the exact opposite of evolution. Species do not change, whereas evolution strictly teaches that the slow, gradual change in organisms from one kind to another has led to what we have today. Moving on here, we have a little information on Charles Darwin. He is the father of evolution, and he completely popularized it. Here we see that he trained to be an Anglican priest. He actually studied to be a priest, but he actually turned away from that, and he took a 5-year journey on the HMS Beagle. The HMS Beagle was a ship. He left from up in Europe, and he sailed around the world on this ship. And I've provided a map here. You can see his route. It's a little blurry, but you can see the lines that he actually sailed around the world. And on this voyage, he spent much of his time analyzing geography and animals, plants, and it ultimately led to his development of the theory of evolution. Next, we see that Charles Darwin was influenced by the Principles of Geology, written by Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a heavy influence on Charles Darwin, and actually promoted this belief of uniformitarianism. This is the idea that the Earth is very old and has been changing very slowly over time. Here we see also that descent with modification is a very important ideology found within evolution. This is the idea that all living things came from from common ancestors and changed little with each passing generation. This isn't necessarily the case in evolution. Descent with modification is a real thing that happens. It happens with humans. As the parents pass on their genetic information to their child, there is some genetic variation, but the idea with evolution is that there is a lot of genetic variation and even mutations that evolve the species drastically over time. And the next term there is survival of the fittest. Many of us have heard this. It's the same idea for the survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest is a real thing. The species that is most suitable for its environment will, in fact, survive and be, the most successful, and its offspring will be the most successful. But when you have the one that's the least suitable for its environment, that species will usually die off. And this is a real thing, but evolution takes it to the extreme, saying that it will cause mutations, and it completely changes species to become more fit. rather than small changes, that take into account genetic information. So moving on, we have this term here, adaptations. This is inheritable traits that make organisms fit and are passed down to the next generation. This is the basis for Darwin's theory of evolution, in that adaptations, or these changes in genetics passed down from parents, start a process of evolution in a species which happens slowly over millions of years, resulting in a major change. Moving on, we see Darwin's writings, and I believe that we have that here. Darwin's writings on artificial selection, or the breeding. Artificial selection is the selecting the best qualities to pass along to future generations. And it says breeding there, so it could be like in a dog. You could pick, like if a dog was good at herding, you could take that, and if you wanted a big dog, you could take the size of one dog and the breeding ability of another, or the herding ability of another dog, and breed those two together until ultimately that species of dog had both of those qualities. The next one you see there is natural selection. This is organisms with variations that increase their fitness and are more likely to pass on their traits to the next generation. He also wrote a book called On the Origin of Species in 1859, and his book, Origin of Species, changed the world in the area of science and theology, especially in terms of the origin of life. Other notable views, you can see the view here of Aristotle. He actually formulated, him and his teacher Plato actually formulated the belief in fixity of species, which we've already discussed. And this led him to develop a ranking of the highest function to lowest function for vertebrates and invertebrates. On his ladder of life, as they call it, he had humans at the top of the vertebrate list and fish at the bottom of the vertebrate list. So it went humans to fish, and then this belief and ranking system actually led to Linnaeus here, who developed the modern theory of taxonomy and the development of the classification system. Next, you see that this man named Malthus predicted a catastrophe due to the increasing population. As the increase in population occurred, he also feared that the food supply would not be able to keep up with the population increase, and predicted a catastrophe. And that is a huge issue today. People are very concerned about the growing population. As we've surpassed 7 billion people. People fear that the earth will become crowded and we won't be able to produce enough food, and that a catastrophe will occur simply because of this issue. Next, we see that Lamarck here, his theory of use and disuse, or the inheritance of acquired characteristics. This right here, you can see this picture of this diagram here. It shows the elongation of the neck of a giraffe. According to Lamarck, he believed that giraffes were actually deer-like creatures that, over time, as the trees grew, as you see in this picture, that the giraffes had to use their necks to reach. And so this caused the slow, gradual biologic evolution of the giraffe's neck to become elongated. And so that's the theory of use and disuse. They used it, and so that characteristic was passed on to the offspring. We also see Charles Lyell. That was the man who popularized uniformitarianism, or the idea that the processes of the earth and have operated the same way at a slow rate over the course of millions of years in their terminology. This was the Principles of Geology. We also see a man by the last name of Wallace. He was a contemporary of Charles Darwin, and he wrote papers on natural selection and actually developed a theory of evolution that was basically identical to Charles Darwin's, and they were actually friends and worked together. And so they developed this theory somewhat together, but Charles Darwin is remembered more so. We see this man here, De Vries. He wrote on the mutation theory of evolution. He was a Dutch geneticist that studied heredity, and he developed the idea of discontinuous variation. And most people believe in a slow, gradual change, but he believed in this discontinuous variation, or this mutation theory, that had the idea that large changes occur only over a short period of time. So it doesn't take that long. It's just major changes between the parents and the offspring in just a few generations. We'll move on to the modern theory of evolution here. We will begin with Darwinism. Darwinism is the driving force of, it's the driving ideology of modern evolution. And we see refinements to Darwinism gave the world modern evolutionary theory. So originally, Darwinism did not have these things, but over time it was refined. And so one of the things that was added was the genetics. Originally, Darwin did not have much genetic information or proof or things to back his theory, and so he discovered used the mutation selection theory and neo-Darwinism. The mutation selection theory is the concept that mutation supplies the variation, the change passed down to the offspring from the parents, and natural selection determines which of these variations will survive and be reproduced. So you could think of it like this: a tree frog has maybe yellow eyes and helps it blend in, and another tree frog has red eyes. The variation and the mutation is the different color of the eyes, and natural selection will actually determine which of the eye colors is more beneficial to the tree frog's survival, especially as the generations continue. We also see here, lastly, paleontology. It is the study of fossils, and this can be of great help to studying the origins of life and knowing when and where. For an evolutionist, this could help determine where evolution has occurred, and according to the geologic column, around what time the evolution has taken place, and different things like this. It helps give the evolutionist information concerning the time and location of the organism. And so that will be all for today. We will continue our next lesson tomorrow.